Hello everybody, welcome back to American Textbook Reading. I'm Brian Stuart, and today we're looking at Science Book 3, Lesson 6. Lesson 6 is about soil. Soil, that's like dirt. So we have a unit about dirt. We're going to learn about dirt today, soil. So you'll discover different types. Did you know there are different types of dirt? And there are also different layers of dirt. But let's call it soil because soil is a more scientific name for dirt. Okay, so we'll call it soil. Okay, so let's get started. As usual, we'll get started with the vocabulary. Here we go. Okay, our first word is interesting. You may have not heard this word before. It's humus. Humus. The pronunciation is humus. Sometimes people get a little confused about that, but humus, think about another word that's pronounced very similarly, but is a different word, human, but this is humus. So human, humus. Similar pronunciation at the beginning, humus, not human. Okay, and also be careful because humus is not hummus. Hummus is a food from the Middle East. Humus is the part of soil made from dead plants or animals. So don't get them confused, right? Ugh, I want some humus for dinner. Ugh, that's horrible. That's disgusting. But hummus is very delicious and it's very nutritious. It's a good food for you. So it's interesting. Hummus, H-U-M-M-U-S, hummus. Okay, that's a food. Okay? So be careful with these words, pronunciation, and don't get it mixed up with the food from the Middle East. Okay, humus. Okay, good. Next word. Grain. Grain is a very small piece of a hard thing, not a soft thing, right? A hard thing. So, very good example. When you go to the beach, what do you find at the beach? You find a lot of sand near the water, right? If you pick up that sand, is it all together? No, it's in little pieces. And you let the sand fall through your fingers, through your hand, until just one piece is left. Just one piece of sand, and we call that a grain of sand. But grain is also used for many types of food, like if you have wheat or rice. You have a lot of rice. You pick up rice, it all falls through your hand, but you have one piece of rice left, and that piece of rice is a grain of rice. So a grain is a very small piece, one single piece of a hard thing, but it usually occurs in large quantities, right? Rice, wheat, sugar. Sugar, you can have a grain of sugar. Sweet. Okay. Anyway, that's grain. Okay. Dig. Do you like to dig in your yard? Now, a lot of people, unfortunately, don't have yards. We live in high-rise apartments. But if you have a backyard, you might dig a hole to put a plant in it. Now, here we have an animal that's a professional digger. It digs for a living. Well, it digs because it lives underground. It's called a mole, M-O-L-E. This is a type of animal, right? That is a mole. And they dig in the ground. They're very good at digging in the ground. Many animals like to dig in the ground. Your dog, if it gets the chance, might like to dig a hole in the ground. So to dig. Okay. And here we have a video of a rabbit digging. Rabbits live underground. They will make their home underground. And rabbits can dig a hole. They'll dig and make a little tunnel, and they'll live in a hole with their family. And this is just an example of a rabbit. Looks like a rabbit in a zoo or maybe some kind of place where you can go see them. And they gave it some dirt because a rabbit's instinct is to dig. Okay, next, collect. Collect means to gather, right? You want to get many different pieces of something and bring it all together, you collect it. So to come or to bring together from other places. Another word that's very similar to collect is gather. To gather. It means to get many pieces of something and to bring them all together in a pile or some kind of organized pile, organized stack to collect, to bring together from other places. Okay. Decompose, interesting word, decompose. When something dies, or, you know, when you eat something like an apple, right? You eat the apple. Do you eat the whole apple? You don't eat the core of the apple. You throw it away. Well, what happens to it? It breaks down over time. Sun, wind, rain, earth, you know, if it gets trampled, it will break down over time, and it will rot also by itself, right? It will turn brown and turn into a liquid and, you know, kind of go into the ground, decompose. That's for dead plants or dead animals will break down naturally, and they'll become part of the soil. And what do you call that? Humus, right? Okay, that's what we learned at the beginning. Okay, so decompose. Weather. Now the weather is very powerful sometimes, and it's always there. So over a long time, the weather can have very dramatic effects, but it takes a long time. Well, sometimes it can have a very dramatic effect over a short time, if it's a hurricane or cyclone or typhoon. To change under the action of the weather is here. So weather, it's a different meaning. Now, we know what the weather is. The weather is it sunny? Is it raining? Is it windy? Is it cold? Is it hot? That's the weather. But to weather something means to change, or to have an effect of change over a long time because of the weather. So it's a little bit of a different sense. Weather, to change, to have an effect. I'm trying to make a different definition for it. To have an reaction. I'm sorry, a reaction, not an reaction. A reaction to the environment, because it's, environment. It's not just the weather that you can weather. For example, let's say you have a bad experience in your life and you survive it, but it teaches you something. So even though that's not the weather, it's a bad experience, you weathered it. And hopefully you became stronger because of it. So to weather means to endure or to change because of the weather. Now this is an interesting picture. Like I said, I grew up in the southwest of America. We can see many examples of this. The Grand Canyon is a good example. Of course, the Grand Canyon was formed by a river, but many of the rocks that are still standing, the wind has been pushing them for centuries, right? For hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years in some parts of the desert. And you can see that the rocks have strange shapes. They have some fantastic shapes sometimes, some amazing shapes. And that's because the wind has been weathering the rocks for a very long time. So to change under the action of the weather is also to weather. So it's a little bit of a different idea. It's not the weather, it's to weather, okay? To change under the action of the weather. Okay, next. We have mixture. So remember I was talking before about sand, rice, sugar, wheat, right? Let's say you mixed all those together. All those little grains, you mixed them together. So you have lots of grains of different things together. That is a mixture, okay? If you like to eat grains for cereal, like granola, granola is a mixture of different grains. You probably have wheat in there, you might have rice, you have some nuts in there, you might have some berries in there. So that's a combination of different things. They're all mixed together. It's delicious when you eat it for breakfast. Okay. Next we have pile, right? We saw that picture before when we saw collect, right? Collect, you gather. When you gather things together, when you collect them, you probably make a pile of something. And your pile can be very neat and straight. If the things that you are collecting are like square or easy to build on, if they're not square, they're round, they kind of roll around like marbles, then you just kind of have a little pile of things. And it's hard to put marbles on top of each other. But if you have something else, you know, you just make a pile. And sometimes your pile can look like this. If it's blocks or squares, you can make a pile that's very neat. But usually a pile of something, it looks like, kind of looks like this, right? That's a pile. So a pile of leaves, a pile of sand, a pile of grains of something. A number of things on top of each other. Okay, that's our vocabulary for today. Let's talk about some ideas for this unit. First of all, we were talking about layers of soil. So remember, soil is like dirt. You go outside and you look at the dirt. The grass is growing from the dirt, from the soil. But did you know, you only see the top part, right? You only see the surface of the soil. You don't see underneath. If you dig a hole, then you can see usually you can see layers. You can see different colors or maybe different composition of the soil. You know, at the top it might be looser sandy, but underneath it might be harder, right? So that's very interesting. We call those layers, right? Think about your bed at home when it's winter time, right? Maybe you have a thin sheet first, and then you have a nice thick warm blanket, and then you have a thinner cover over that to protect the blanket. You have many layers on top of you in your bed in the winter time. Not in the summertime, it's too hot, but in the winter time, right? So you have layers. The same thing in the ground. We have different layers of soil. So the top layer of the soil is called topsoil. Very easy. It's on top. That's a very easy way to remember. Topsoil is very important for farmers. Farmers love topsoil. They need topsoil. The thing is, and this has happened in America, in states like Oklahoma in the 1930s or 1920s, a lot of wind came through and it blew away all the topsoil. And so the farmers couldn't grow the crops. Because what's in the topsoil? Topsoil is mostly humus and minerals. Humus is, remember, the dead and decaying parts of animals or things, right? And minerals, there's a lot of minerals in topsoil. The plants need the topsoil to grow. If there's no topsoil, it all blows away, then what's left is not good. There's not really soil, it's just dirt, and the plants can't really grow in it very well. And so you can't grow crops. You don't have food. There's a big problem. So farmers really love topsoil. They need topsoil. Topsoil is important for us to grow food. Now, the middle layer of soil is called the subsoil. Sub, because sub means under, right? Sub means under. That's why we say subway for subway systems, under the street, right? Subway, subsoil, under the top layer. There's less humus. There's more small rocks and minerals. Now, the bottom layer is called bedrock. Bedrock. Bed. It's on the bottom. It's the bed. And it's mostly rock. Now, when you hit bedrock, if you're digging a hole, let's say you want to plant a tree in your yard, so you dig a hole, you dig through the top soil, you want to get into the subsoil. If you go down too far, your shovel's going to hit rock. And that's bedrock. You can't dig into it very easily. It's very difficult to dig into it because it's mostly rock. Okay, and that would be the bedrock. So it's interesting to think about these different layers of soil. Okay, there's different kinds of soil too, right? There's clay. Clay is smooth or sticky. And clay has water in it, right? So you usually find clay where there are rivers or streams. Clay is very important because a long time ago, right, people used clay and they realized if they get the wet, it's like wet mud, and they could shape it. They can make shapes out of it. They can make like bowls or pots to hold water. And if they made the shape and they put it out in the sun or used a fire to dry it to get all the water out, it dried and it became very hard. And this is how ancient people made bowls and pots and containers for water or other things. So they use clay. Humus, we talked about humus. Humus is brown and soft, sometimes a little smelly, but it's very important because it has a lot of nutrients, a lot of minerals and nutrients that plants need to grow. So if you have a farm with a lot of humus in your soil, then you will be able to grow good crops. Okay. Sand is not good for growing plants, right? Water goes right through sand. It doesn't hold on to the water. so the plants can't get water. Sand is rough and dry. Sand is what we find in the desert. If you go to the Sahara Desert, you can see very beautiful pictures of the sand dunes. They're very beautiful. And the wind will shape the dunes into very nice, beautiful shapes. So that's sand. Then we have silt. Silt is smooth and powdery. Powdery, it's like if you hit it, right, a little powder comes up, right? It's like if you have flour at home, you know, you bake cookies. And flour is powdery because if you take a little pinch of it and throw it up, poof, it goes up and it makes a mess. So don't do that. Your mom will be angry. Okay, but anyway, that's powdery. Now, silt is usually found in rivers. And the river or the streams will take the silt because it's very small, it's very smooth, it's very light, and it comes down with the water. It doesn't really sink. It comes with the water. And when the water goes out to the ocean or to the lake, the silt will finally, you know, there's so much silt coming through, it'll finally get to the bottom and it'll build up. And sometimes the river has to change because the silt builds up on the bottom of the river. And if a lot of silt builds up, then boats can't go up the river because the silt keeps building up and it makes the water less and less, and the water has to go around it. Okay, so those are different kinds of soil. Kind of interesting, huh? So, we've learned a lot of things about dirt today. Okay, let's get into the reading. Okay, here's the reading, and as usual, please read along with me. Maybe read along in your mind or read along out loud. Practice the pronunciation and focus on the vocabulary words for today. Let's begin. Soil is a mixture of weathered rock, minerals, humus, air, and water. When rocks are weathered, they break down into smaller pieces. Sand is a grain of rock. Grains can be carried by water or wind. Grains collect in a pile, and when mixed with humus, they become soil. When plants or animals die, they decompose into humus. Humus is rich in nutrients that plants use to grow. There are three main layers of soil. The top layer has mostly humus in it. Most plant roots are in the top layer of soil. Let me interrupt here. And this is why topsoil is so important, because the top layer has mostly humus in it. When plants grow, their roots are usually in the top layer of soil because they're getting the nutrients from the humus. Okay, let's continue. The middle layer has less humus and more small rocks and minerals in it. The bottom layer is mostly rock. Some animals live in soil. When they dig into the soil, they move humus down. This makes the soil richer in nutrients. And that's very interesting right there too, because think about what kind of animals live in soil. Well, we talked about moles, right? Rabbits live in soil, but also what else lives in soil? Smaller creatures. They're very long. They're earthworms. Earthworms are very important to soil and to farmers. Earthworms. Now maybe you think, ugh, earthworms are gross, right? They're sticky, they're wet. Ugh, you don't like to touch them, and they curl around, right? But they dig into the topsoil. They love humus, right? They love to eat the decomposing materials. But as they dig, right, they put air, they also push the humus down into the soil, and it's very good conditions for growing plants. So farmers like to have worms. They like earthworms in their fields because they help the soil become more fertile, and plants can grow in them because the earthworms help dig holes in the humus and they dig into the soil. So that's interesting. Okay, let's take a look at some of the organization of this paragraph, of this reading, okay? Here, the reading skill is main idea and detail. So we have a main idea, that is the topic or the theme of the reading, and then we have details that support that main idea. What is the main idea? The main idea of this reading is that soil is a mixture of things. Soil is a mixture of things. Soil has many different things in it, okay? That is the main idea. What are the details? Well, rocks get beep. They break down into beep, which are tiny pieces of rock. Okay, so remember we talked about the sun, if it's sunny, if it's hot, it's cold, maybe it's windy, maybe it's raining. We call that what is the weather. But remember, weather has another meaning. Weather means to change something through the weather. And one thing we learned from the reading is that as the weather, usually the wind, the rain, will break down rocks, right? If you have big rocks, like I said, the Grand Canyon, you have these huge rocks, and the wind and the rain is constantly pushing them and changing them and break down into smaller pieces. So that process is called weathering. So rocks get weathered. W-E-A-T-H-E-R. And because it's a verb, not a noun, we say weathered. So remember, you can think about weather as a noun, what is the weather like? Or you can think about weather as a verb, right? To weather something means to change because of usually the weather, but it could be an experience like I said before. So weathered, rocks get weathered. They break down into what? Small pieces. What are tiny pieces? We call those grains, remember. Oops, well, that was weird. Grains. Okay, so I don't know why that big long line, ignore that. Okay, grains. They break down into grains, which are tiny pieces of rock. Okay, grains are carried by beep or wind. Okay, they collect in a pile and are mixed with humus. So grains are carried by what? What are the two things that I talked about that carry soil, whether it's silt, right? I remember when I talked about silt, I was talking about how they were moving. They're carried by water. So they are carried by water or wind. Water or wind. Grains are carried by water or wind. They collect in a pile and are mixed with humus. When plants and animals die, they beep into humus. So when something dies, right, I said it changes, right? The weather may change it, but also the internal processes, the cells breaking down. They will normally just break down. It smells bad, and it also, but it breaks down. It changes, in many cases, it changes from a solid to a liquid also, and it goes into the soil that way. And what do we call that process? It's decompose. So decompose. When plants and animals die, they decompose into humus. Okay? And remember, humus is very good for plants to grow. And when you think about it, this is part of the cycle of life that we talked about before, right? When something dies, right, it decomposes, it goes into the soil, right? And this creates humus, and then plants I'm not a very good artist. Plants can grow. I don't know what that is. A tree. Let's say it's a tree. Okay, and then they have little apples. It's an apple tree, so somebody comes by and eats it. They throw it down, and then it turns into humus again, and then it keeps going, right? It's a cycle of life, okay? And that's just part of life. But next time you go out into nature, not in the city where there's concrete and asphalt on streets, but go out into nature where there's trees and there's grass, take a look at the ground and think about what's going on under the surface of the ground, right? You can see the surface, that's the topsoil where all the grass and the trees are getting their nutrients, right? And remember, there's different layers. If you dig into that soil, you can see different layers and different parts of the soil, right? And that's all underground. It's hidden, unless you know about it. And now you know about it. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting thing about our world. And I hope you learned a lot in this lesson. Thanks for studying with me, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.